Hi, I'm Seamless, and I want to discuss a question I get posed plenty of times in comments and emails and whatever. And that question is a very simple one. What is the best DAW? DAW, of course, standing for digital audio workstations such as FL Studio or Ableton Live or Reason or Logic or what else? I don't know. Renoise, Reaper, Bitwig, Cubase, Sonar, Digital Performer, Pro Tools, Cool Edit Pro. I don't know. Like there's a lot of DAWs, as you can tell. So the question of what is the best one, I'm not going to say is an unreasonable one. However, it's a bit of an odd one because the answer isn't super duper obvious, and there are a lot of people who are super duper just ready to champion whatever they like their DAW, and just to say like this is the best DAW, it's better than whatever. Here's all the reasons why. And more often than not, a lot of those answers are just like hugely misinformed, because either the reasons that someone thinks a DAW is the best is usually a personal opinion that really only applies to them because they like a workflow that works best for them. It might not work for everybody. And then they might say that they like this DAW because some other DAWs can't do some things that the DAW can do, and they oftentimes are just wrong. That like whatever the other DAW is usually can do whatever it is that they think they want to do. They just don't know how to do it with that DAW. So like those answers generally tend to be like not super wonderful, which is why my answer is really kind of a non-answer, because the answer of what DAW is the best DAW is super up to you, super duper soups. I personally prefer FL Studio, and a lot of that has to do with just the fact that I've been using FL Studio for 11 years, so I'm just never going to be as good at another DAW as I am FL Studio. It doesn't actually matter if another DAW is objectively better, because I'm just going to be faster with FL all the time, forever. And that's for me. For other people, like, if I were to compare, for example, FL versus Ableton Live, Ableton Live's whole philosophy, from what I could tell, because I've honestly haven't used it at all, I've only watched it being used a few times. Ableton Live's whole philosophy is that everything is very like locked in place. It's very present, and you can see where things are. It's a very clear cut, like signal chain, and there's only so many ways of doing things because those are the ways that the developers felt is the best way to do that one particular thing. I mean, I'm not saying it's just one way. I'm sure there's plenty of ways to do some things, but in comparison to FL Studio, FL is like completely modular, and there are 1,000 ways to do any one thing. And the whole point of that is that the idea of FL is that they want to allow as many different kinds of workflows as they could possibly allow to allow any kind of user to be able to use their software. And I mean that's the plus side of that. The plus side is that anyone can figure out a way to make FL work the best for them. The downside for that is that they have to figure out a way to make it work for them. And that might not be immediately obvious. That might not be obvious at all. And it can be kind of hard for a new person to use it, because then they don't know that you can do that. It's not readily available information that you can really mess with FL that much to make. You could basically make it work like Ableton Live if you really want to. It just takes a bit of work, and no noob is going to know how to do that. So there's that particular problem. If you can consider that a problem, as someone like myself who has been using DAWs like FL for freaking ever, and I know enough about the engineering aspect of just making audio and using things, I can figure out how to use any other DAW, just because for the most part they all do the same thing. They're just wrapped in different presentations. Like back in the day, there did used to be, and by back in the day I mean like 8 or 9 years ago, there used to be a very distinct performance and capability difference between the various DAWs. FL didn't have even a little of the functionality it had now. It couldn't even record things like directly input from an audio interface. There wasn't really a lot of audio interfaces either, but it wasn't a thing that FL could do. So it wasn't a direct competitor with just other basic recording platforms that came later and that kind of thing. And so back then, like, you really did just get FL if you were making very sort of only electronic based like beats, which is why FL got a reputation for being really good for hip hop kind of production, because it was almost engineered for that to be its specific purpose. As time grew, it integrated more functionality and more different kinds of performance, and you basically can do whatever you want with it. And that's kind of true for most other DAWs as well. Other DAWs, with very few exceptions, most DAWs can do everything that every other DAW can do. And the differences between the DAWs are super duper, basically superficial, mostly cosmetic or workflow oriented, which I guess is not really superficial. Workflow is very important. So the kind of work kind of user that you are will determine what kind of DAW that you can use the best. And of course, there's demos for all of these DAWs, so you can try yourself and figure it out for yourself, which is still kind of hard to do as someone who's inexperienced because you just don't know about like the higher level things that you can do with a DAW that might be the best for your particular kind of workflow. And then there's exceptions for things like Reason. Reason is a DAW that decided, like when it was new, I guess still now, it differentiates itself by adhering to the workflow presented by actual physical hardware, and it limits itself to that pretty hard. And not only that, but it doesn't allow third-party plugins that don't develop a specific version of its plugin to work in its very visual, very specific architecture. And that's not necessarily really a bad thing about it, because that if especially when it was brand new, most of the people who were getting into music production at all only had experience with hardware, just because the digital offerings weren't so hot. So it made a lot of sense to do that for a digital offering. And now it's really just kind of a choice. And a lot of newer producers don't have the kind of experience with like hardware that anyone else would. So that's how that plays out will be an interesting thing as time moves forward. Yeah. So like, and then there's other minor differences. Like, for example, FL Studio famously does not have the same kind of audio warping capabilities that Ableton Live does, and vice versa. Ableton Live doesn't have some of the native plugins that are as good as FL Studio's plugins. Although you can have, like, this is something else about DAWs, is that a lot of DAWs have their own plugins as VSTs that you could use. You can actually use ImageLine's VSTs inside Ableton Live if you're a Windows user. And in the future they'll make. I mean, they're in the process of developing native Mac versions as well, so you'll be able to use them in the Mac version as well. And that's a saving grace for a lot of people, because they like Ableton's workflow, but they just like the FL plugins just so much better. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Like for me personally, more things I like about FL are things like just the way that the arrangement window works is different from every other DAW. Every other DAW works the way where, like, you have a track and that track is the thing, like that's the element, like that's the instrument you're using, and then you put data in the track like MIDI or automation, and then that's how you mess with the instrument. And in FL, for the arrangement window, the tracks don't mean anything. They're just there as an optional organizational ability, and you can just put whatever, wherever, and I way prefer that to everything else. And that might just be because I grew up, quote unquote, with FL. Although the original iterations of FL's playlist, which is what they refer to it as, used a process referred to as the pattern block system, which more or less was kind of a pseudo track-based idea in terms of one lane was really one thing and only that one thing. And like I said before, you can make current FL work like that. You can make a track be the one thing and only that one thing if you really want to. I just feel as though that's not really its power. Like, it's easiest, like most efficient workflow, but that's also just my opinion. That's not me saying that it's the best. It's just saying this is what it can do. And for so many people who are watching this, some people are going to think it's awesome. Some people are going to think that's stupid. And what really bothers me about the people who think it's stupid, and also honestly the people who think it's awesome, is that a lot of the times they conflate their opinions with being fact. And they present it as just saying, like, you should just use Ableton. It's just better because you can't do this is whatever FL. And not only, like I said, are they usually wrong, you usually can do whatever they say in FL. You just got to figure out how, which I'm not necessarily saying is, like, wonderful, because some of that is kind of like, it needs to be like a main and obvious thing. And oftentimes it's not super obvious whatever that is that you want to do in FL. But the fact of the matter remains that you can do it. But then they also say just conflating their opinion with fact, and it's not. I don't care if you hate FL. I don't care if you never want to use FL and that you're just Ableton forever or Reason or Logic or any of that. Like, it's your opinion. It's not universal fact. It's not going to be the same for everyone else. And I almost feel like it's a waste of time trying to say this and try to make this a lesson on what opinions are, because my biggest demographic is 13 to 17-year-olds. And I mean, I remember being a teenager. I remember what opinions felt like back then. And so that means every time there's always going to be a thing. That's just how humans are. But yeah. Other weird stuff, like until recently, you couldn't have curved automation in Ableton. And I think that Logic doesn't have a slip edit tool. And there's a lot of curious curious functionality missing from particular DAWs. Like Reason, you can't have VSTs, and that just seems stupid. That just seems really dumb. It's in. I mean, unlike the other stupid mistakes, they did that on purpose. That wasn't them forgetting to do something. That wasn't them just not thinking it was important. They just don't do that because that's their architecture and that's what they want to do. But like, FL's audio warping capabilities, like again, you can do it. It's just not as easy as it is in Ableton, and it's also not as versatile. But it's like they know about it and they're working on it, so like they're just dealing with it. And then like Ableton's curved automation, they have it now, but they went through 8 versions of it before they could do that. And there was a lot of stuff that FL only recently added in FL12, like the ability to select more than one mixer and start to do stuff with them, and the ability to link more than one at once and that kind of thing. Like just the kind of the usability of their mixer is way better now. But it was also stuff that really should have been a thing for kind of a long time, to the point where some people were making mods of FL Studio to add that kind of functionality in there. And every DAW is guilty of this. I'm sure. I haven't actually looked at Bitwig to the point where I know enough about what it does and how it works, but I am sure that there are plenty of things that are people just consider that are basic functionality that it doesn't have. And I'm sure there's way more about Ableton that people think that it's missing that I don't know about. And same thing with FL. I'm sure there's plenty more about. I'm just used to how FL's way of doing things. I don't even know it's weird, and that it's apparently really using other DAWs. Like that's just a thing. And every DAW has that problem. And I don't think any DAW has that problem more than any other DAW. To the point, like a lot of people actually use more than one DAW. Especially because of FL and FL's plugins. If they're on a Mac version, they usually run like a Windows Parallels, or they use the crossover wrapper version of FL to use FL for sound design, and then they use Ableton for arrangement and that kind of thing. And I know a lot of people who did the same thing with Reason. They use FL for that. This is why Rewire is a big thing, because Rewire's whole point is that you're able to use more than one DAW with FL. I don't know how any of that works because I never had to and I never cared because I always just want to use FL. But I know it's a thing. And so and also for a while I used Reaper for just recording things, for just the ability to record into my computer, and then I took the files and messed with them inside FL. That's all I ever used Reaper for. And so you're not necessarily limited to one DAW, but I do really think it's a good idea to have one DAW as being kind of like your base, as being like, this is the thing that I'm using. And you do have to be careful, because there was a kind of a scary period for Logic users where they thought that they were never going to get another update ever again, because they thought that Apple was discontinuing the product. And then they did have an update, and it broke everything or something. Like, Logic users are having a bad time, and I can that's unfortunate. Sorry. So yeah, that's kind of just a very long-winded way of saying that, like, no DAW is really the best DAW in terms of, like, actual objectivity. In terms of your personal beliefs and, like, your workflow and the styles that you want to mess with, there definitely will be a DAW that's best for you. But in order to determine what that is, you gotta do a little bit of research and experimentation. And don't trust, like, really don't trust anything. Don't trust me. Don't take my word for it. Like, you gotta find stuff out for yourself. Don't trust fanboys either, and don't trust marketing materials. It's just something that you really need to do hands-on, your own, figure stuff out, and then do it, because that. Much like I said in the one of the best plugins video that I did, you can figure out like what your idols use. Like, a lot of people, especially, like, that just happens. People like, Cohen Sound uses Reason. BT uses Logic. He's a big fan of Logic. He uses a lot of DAWs, but he's a big fan of Logic. AU5, I'm pretty sure, uses Logic. What else? Skrillex used Ableton. I think. Deadmau5, I think, still uses Ableton. Like, I use FL. It's whatever it is, whatever the people that you like look up to, like whatever it is that they use, you could just use that, because then you at least know that whatever you don't know about how a DAW works, you know that it can do whatever it is that they did. And that's a good place to start. But you also have to keep in mind that just because they used it to do what they did does not mean that what they used was the best way to do what they did. It just means that that's what they used. It's full on possible that, given, like, if they knew everything about themselves and what they wanted, and knew everything about every DAW, about everything that they could do, that they would actually have made different choices, because they knew more than what they did when they decided to use what they did to get to do what they wanted. And not just because they were used to it. And that's possible. That's something you gotta be on top of that forever, for all the things to do. Because I personally don't know, like, what the best is. For all I know, Bitwig might just be the second coming, but again, have been using FL for so long that at this point, I really don't think it matters. But that's for my own personal, for just me. Anyway, I hope this was informative. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and do all the fun stuff. And if you have any questions about this, let me know. And as usual, have a nice day.